In the glass tower at the heart of Manhattan, Adelaide Montgomery slammed her hand on the boardroom table. Everyone is fired. The door had barely closed when a man stepped in, his uniform damp with sweat, pushing a bucket and old mop. He bent down to place a wet floor sign, calmly avoiding her contemptuous stare. A piece of metal slipped from his shirt pocket, ringing against marble. Adelaide picked up the metal, reading the engraving. Charles Montgomery. Her breath caught. Who was this janitor? She did not know the man bending down to clean her floor had once returned her father's life to him and was about to save the empire she was destroying. Montgomery Dynamics Tower stood 68 stories above the financial district, a column of steel and glass that reflected autumn clouds like a mirror reflecting doubt. Inside, white LED lights cast everything in surgical coldness. Rain tapped against the windows on the 58th floor, where Adelaide Montgomery, 30 years old and newly appointed CEO, stood alone in the boardroom after dismissing her entire security team. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight. Her red dress with its sharp V-neck collar matched the sharpness in her voice. She had signed the termination papers without hesitation, her hand steady, her face a mask of discipline. But discipline, to Adelaide, had always meant control, and control meant eliminating anyone who might fail her. Her mother had died when Adelaide was 9. The memory was a wound that never quite healed. After that, she had been raised by Charles Montgomery, a man whose name meant warmth to employees but whose attention felt like sunlight through glass. Bright, but somehow distant. Charles had built Montgomery Dynamics on a philosophy of technology and humanity, on the idea that you should never judge a person by their appearance. But Adelaide had learned a different lesson. She had learned that softness was dangerous, that trust was a liability, that leaders who hesitated were leaders who fell. When Charles suffered a stroke 6 months ago, Adelaide had taken the helm in a storm. The media called her cold. The board called her unproven. And now, with a code leak threatening a $4.2 billion government contract, she had done what she thought was necessary. She had fired everyone who might be responsible. As she stood looking out at the rain, she did not hear the door open behind her. She did not notice the man in the janitorial uniform until the soft scrape of the mop bucket wheels broke her thoughts. She turned, ready to dismiss him, but her heel caught the edge of her own briefcase. She stumbled. Her hand shot out for the table, but the marble floor was slick. The janitor moved faster than she expected. His calloused hand caught her elbow, steadying her with a grip that was firm but not rough. Up close, she saw his face, weathered, with lines around calm eyes that had seen more than she could guess. He said nothing. He simply helped her find her balance, then stepped back and bent down to place a yellow sign on the floor. Wet floor. A warning she had ignored. That was when the metal fell. It slipped from the chest pocket of his uniform, a small piece of bronze on a faded ribbon, and it rang like a bell when it hit the marble. Adelaide bent down before he could retrieve it. She turned it over in her hand. The engraving was worn but legible. For valor in the face of enemy fire. Kandahar Province. And beneath that, a name. Charles Montgomery. Her father's name. She looked up at the janitor, but he was already turning away, reaching for his mop. "Wait," she said. Her voice was quieter now, uncertain. "This medal. It has my father's name on it." The man paused. His shoulders were broad beneath the thin fabric of his uniform. He did not turn around. "He belongs to him," the janitor said. His voice was low, steady, with the kind of calm that comes from carrying heavy things for a long time. "I was going to return it." Adelaide felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. She wanted to ask more, but the man was already moving again, pushing his bucket toward the door. She watched him go, the metal still warm in her hand. Who was he? And why did he have her father's medal? His name was Henry Lawson. He was 36 years old. He had a daughter named Ella, who was 7, bright, and polite, and who loved to count rhythms with her fingers while she practiced piano. Henry had once been an aerospace engineer, a specialist in structural integrity for military aircraft. He had served in Kandahar, where he had seen things that still woke him in the night. He had watched colleagues die in an explosion, had survived with minor injuries and a heavy burden. After that, he could not return to the work. The noise, the pressure, the memory of fire and screaming metal. It was too much. So he cleaned floors. He worked the night shift at Montgomery Dynamics, a job that let him be home when Ella woke up, that let him walk her to school and pick her up in the afternoon. It was quiet work. Humble work. Work that let him stay invisible. But Henry had not always been invisible. Once, in the dust and heat of a battlefield, he had pulled a man from a burning vehicle. That man had been Charles Montgomery, who had been visiting a forward operating base as part of a defense contract review. The vehicle had hit an improvised explosive device. Charles had been unconscious, his leg trapped. Henry had used a metal pen to create an emergency airway, had dragged him clear, had stayed with him until the medics arrived. Charles had survived, and Charles had never forgotten. The medal in Adelaide's hand was Henry's. Charles had insisted he take it, but Henry had refused to wear it. To him, it felt like showing off. His daughter believed her father was a hero, but she also believed that heroes did not need to brag. So Henry carried the medal in his pocket, a reminder of a debt he felt he owed, and a promise he had made. To live quietly, to raise his daughter well, to avoid the spotlight that had once nearly destroyed him. That night, after his shift ended, Henry walked the empty corridors of Montgomery Tower, checking doors and turning off lights. It was nearly 3 in the morning. The building was silent except for the hum of ventilation and the distant beep of electronics. As he passed the server room on the 42nd floor, he heard something unusual. A beep, not the steady rhythm of normal operation, but a sharp, irregular pulse. Henry stopped. He should have kept walking. It was not his job. But old instincts die hard. He set down his mop and opened the server room door. Inside, racks of blinking lights filled the space, casting green and amber glows on the walls. He moved carefully, listening. There, in the corner, a rack that should have been dormant was active, and attached to the auxiliary switch was a small device, no bigger than a thumb drive, blinking red, a back door. Someone had installed a back door into the network. Henry's mind raced. He knew what this was. He had worked on secure systems before. This device was siphoning data, routing it somewhere outside the building. It was sophisticated, professional, and it had been placed where no one would think to look. He could have called security, but the security team had just been fired. He could have called the police, but that would mean questions, attention, scrutiny. He could have done nothing, but his daughter's tuition depended on this job. And more than that, the man whose name was on the medal in his pocket had built this company. Charles Montgomery had trusted people. Henry could not stand by and watch it burn. So he did what he knew how to do. He isolated the device. He used a maintenance terminal to create a soft partition around the compromised switch, cutting it off from the main network without alerting whoever was on the other end. Then, he logged everything. Every packet, every timestamp, every digital fingerprint. And when he was done, he sent an anonymous report to an old email address he had seen in a maintenance manual. Read, Alerts, at Montgomery, an address Charles had created years ago, back when he still believed in people who saw problems and fixed them quietly. Then Henry closed the server room door, picked up his mop, and finished his shift. The next morning, Adelaide stood in her office, staring at the medal on her desk. She had not slept. She had spent the night searching through her father's old files, looking for any mention of Henry Lawson. She found nothing. But she did find something else, a photograph tucked into the back of an old notebook. Her father, younger, standing beside a man in military fatigues. The man's face was obscured by shadow, but his posture was familiar, tall, steady, calm. On the back of the photograph, in her father's handwriting. Sometimes, we are saved by people we never see coming. Adelaide felt a strange tightness in her throat. She had spent so much time trying to prove she was strong enough to lead, trying to show she was not soft like her mother, that she had forgotten what her father had always tried to teach her. That strength was not the same as hardness. That trust was not the same as weakness. She was still thinking about this when her assistant knocked on the door. "There is someone here to see you," the assistant said. "A little girl. She says her father works here." Adelaide frowned. "Send her in." The door opened, and a child stepped inside. She was small, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail, and she wore a school uniform that was slightly too big. She looked around the office with wide eyes, taking in the glass walls and the leather chairs and the view of the city below. Then she looked at Adelaide and smiled. "Hello," the girl said. Her voice was polite, careful. "My name is Ella. I wanted to say thank you." Adelaide blinked. "Thank you? For what?" "For giving my dad a job." Ella's fingers tapped against her leg, counting a rhythm only she could hear. "He says you are very kind. He says people like you give people like us a chance." Adelaide felt something twist in her chest. She thought of the security team she had fired, the people she had dismissed without hesitation, the lives she had disrupted, because she was afraid to look weak. And here was this child, thanking her for a kindness she had not even known she had given. "What does your father do?" Adelaide asked, though she already knew. "He cleans," Ella said simply. "But he used to build things. Important things. He does not talk about it much. He says the important work is the work no one sees." Adelaide swallowed. She felt the weight of the metal in her pocket. She felt the weight of her own choices pressing down on her. Before she could say anything more, Ella smiled again and turned to leave. "Thank you, Miss Montgomery. My dad says you are the kind of person who sees people. I hope you have a good day." The door closed. Adelaide sat down, her hands trembling. She pulled out the metal and stared at it. Who was this man? And why did his daughter's words feel like a mirror held up to her soul? She did not have long to wonder. That afternoon, Damien Cross, the chief financial officer, walked into her office with a tablet and a sharp smile. Damien was 40 years old, tall and thin, with pale skin and a long face marked by high cheekbones and a sharp chin. His hair was slicked back, blonde and shining, and his eyes were the color of winter storms. He wore a silver-gray suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and on his wrist was a diamond-studded watch that caught the light like a warning. "Adelaide," Damien said, his voice smooth as oil. "We have a problem. I think I know who is behind the security breach." Adelaide looked up. "Who?" Damien placed the tablet on her desk. On the screen was a server log, time-stamped from the previous night. It showed unauthorized access to the network, and at the bottom, a user ID that traced back to a maintenance terminal. "Your janitor," Damien said. "Henry Lawson. He accessed the server room last night. He has been tampering with the system." Adelaide felt her stomach drop. She looked at the log. The timestamps matched. The access was real. But something felt wrong. Henry had saved her from falling. His daughter had thanked her, and he carried her father's medal. "Are you sure?" Adelaide asked. Damien's smile widened. "The evidence is clear. I recommend immediate suspension and a full investigation. We cannot afford any more risks." Adelaide stared at the screen. She thought of her father's photograph. She thought of Ella's smile. She thought of the medal. But she also thought of the board, the media, the $4.2 billion contract. She thought of her reputation, her authority, her control. "Suspend him," she said quietly, "and confiscate anything he brought into the building." Damien nodded, satisfaction gleaming in his gray eyes. He left the office without another word. An hour later, Henry Lawson was escorted from the building by internal security. They took his badge. They took his keys. And they took the medal, sealed in a plastic evidence bag. Henry did not resist. He did not shout. He simply nodded, his face calm, his eyes distant. As he walked through the lobby, he saw Ella waiting by the entrance. She had come to meet him after school, like she always did. When she saw the security guards, her face crumpled. "Dad?" she said. Her voice small. Henry knelt down. He put his hands on her shoulders. "It is going to be okay," he said softly. "Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes they do not see the whole picture. But we are going to be fine." "But they took your medal," Ella whispered. Tears ran down her cheeks. "They took Grandpa Charles's medal." Henry pulled her close. "The medal does not make me who I am," he said. "You do." They left the building together, hand in hand, walking into the rain. That night, Adelaide could not sleep. She paced her apartment, a penthouse that felt too large and too empty. She poured herself a glass of wine but did not drink it. She stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, and felt a hollow ache in her chest. She had done what she thought was right. She had protected the company. She had followed the evidence. But Ella's face kept appearing in her mind. The little girl who had thanked her. The little girl whose father she had just destroyed. Finally, Adelaide did something she had not done in years. She went to her father's old study, a room she had kept locked since his stroke. She opened the door and turned on the light. The room smelled of leather and old paper. On the desk was a stack of notebooks, journals her father had kept for decades. She had never read them. She had been too afraid of what she might find. Afraid she would see disappointment. Afraid she would see proof that she was not the daughter he had wanted. But tonight, she opened the first journal. And she read. The entries were scattered, written in her father's careful hand. Some were about business, some were about family. But one entry, dated nearly 15 years ago, made her stop. "Today I met a young engineer who saved my life. His name is Henry Lawson. He pulled me from a burning vehicle in Kandahar. He used a pen to keep me breathing. He stayed with me, even when the gunfire continued. I do not know if he realizes what he did. He does not want recognition. He does not want medals. He just wants to go home and live quietly. I told him that if he ever needs anything, he should find me. I told him to trust people who bow down to pick up small mistakes, because those are the people who see what others miss. If I ever forget this, if I ever become the kind of man who judges by appearance instead of action, I hope someone reminds me. If you are reading this, Adelaide, and if you ever meet Henry Lawson, trust him, even if he is carrying a mop." Adelaide's hands shook. She read the words again and again. Her father had known. He had known Henry was here. He had trusted him, and she had thrown him out. She closed the journal and stood. Her mind was racing. If Henry had accessed the server, maybe it was not to sabotage. Maybe it was to protect. Maybe he had seen something she had missed. And if that was true, then she had made a terrible mistake. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "I need you to find Henry Lawson's address," she said, "and I need you to arrange a meeting." Tonight, 2 hours later, Adelaide stood outside a small apartment building in Brooklyn. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the streetlights in pools of amber. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door. It opened, and Henry stood there, still wearing his undershirt and jeans, his face tired but unsurprised. "Miss Montgomery," he said quietly. "I need to talk to you," Adelaide said. "Please." Henry stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was small but clean. There was a couch with a blanket draped over it, a kitchen table covered in drawings, and a piano in the corner. Ella was asleep on the couch, her small body curled beneath the blanket. Henry gestured for Adelaide to sit at the table. "I read my father's journal," Adelaide said. She placed the medal on the table between them. "He wrote about you, about what you did for him, and I think I made a mistake." Henry looked at the medal but did not reach for it. "You did what you thought was right," he said. "No," Adelaide said. Her voice cracked. "I did what I thought was safe. I was so afraid of looking weak that I stopped looking at all." Her hands clenched into fists. "Tell me the truth. Did you access the server?" "Yes," Henry said. "Why?" "Because someone put a backdoor in your network." Henry's voice was calm, Steady. I found it during my rounds. I isolated it, so it could not do more damage. I logged everything and sent a report to an old email address your father set up. I was trying to help. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. She had been so wrong, so blind. Why did you not tell anyone? Because no one would have believed me. Henry said simply. I am just a janitor. You are not just anything, Adelaide said fiercely. You are the man who saved my father. You are the man who tried to save my company. And I threw you out, like you were nothing. Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and pushed the medal toward her. Keep it, he said. It belongs to your father. Not to me. No, Adelaide said. She pushed it back. It belongs to you. And I am going to prove it. She leaned forward. I need your help, she said. If there is a back door, then someone put it there. Someone with access. Someone who wanted the company to fail. Help me find them. Help me fix this. Henry hesitated. He glanced at Ella, still asleep on the couch. What about my daughter? I will make sure you have the flexibility you need, Adelaide said. And I will make sure she has every opportunity she deserves. Please, Henry. I cannot do this without you. Henry was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, he said. But we do this my way. Quiet. Careful. No spotlight. Agreed, Adelaide said. They shook hands across the table, and for the first time in months, Adelaide felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Over the next 3 days, Henry and Adelaide worked together in secret. Henry was given temporary access as chief of operations. Though he kept his janitorial uniform, he moved through the building like a ghost. Checking systems, tracing data flows, following digital breadcrumbs that only someone with his training could see. Adelaide provided cover, attending meetings, deflecting questions, keeping the board distracted while Henry did the real work. What they found was damning. The back door was not a simple hack. It was part of a coordinated effort to siphon proprietary code and sell it to Ledworth Industries, a competitor, and the person behind it had access to the highest levels of the network. CFO-level access. Damien Cross. Henry traced the data trail back to a ghost account that Damien had created, hidden in the labyrinth of corporate permissions. The account had been used to push code out of the network in small encrypted packets, timed to avoid detection. And when Henry set up a honeypot, a fake repository of sensitive data, Damien took the bait. He accessed the honeypot using his CFO credentials, thinking he was stealing the company's most valuable secrets. But every move was logged. Every keystroke was recorded. And the security cameras in his office captured the reflection of his diamond watch on the monitor. A reflection that matched the exact timestamps of the data theft. Adelaide stared at the evidence on her screen. She felt rage and betrayal and a cold, sharp clarity. Damien had manipulated her. He had framed Henry. He had tried to destroy the company her father had built. What do you want to do? Henry asked. Adelaide looked at him. Then she looked at the calendar. There was a shareholder meeting scheduled for the next morning. The board would be there. The press would be there. It was the perfect stage. I want to end this, she said, publicly. The next morning, the 58th floor boardroom was filled with shareholders, board members, and journalists. Damien Cross stood at the front of the room, a presentation loaded on the screen behind him. He was smiling, confident, ready to deliver his report on cost-cutting measures and financial recovery. His diamond watch glinted under the lights. Adelaide walked in late, Henry beside her. Damien's smile faltered when he saw them. Before we begin, Adelaide said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, I have something to share. She walked to the front of the room and took the remote from Damien's hand. She clicked to a new presentation. On the screen appeared a video. It was grainy, old, shot on a military camera. It showed a burning vehicle in the desert. Smoke, fire, and a man in uniform, dragging another man clear. The second man was Charles Montgomery. The first was Henry Lawson. This is the man you all see standing beside me, Adelaide said. "His name is Henry Lawson. 15 years ago, he saved my father's life in Kandahar. 6 days ago, he saved this company." She clicked again. Server logs appeared on the screen. Timestamps. Access records. The honeypot. The ghost account. And finally, security footage showing Damien at his desk. The reflection of his watch perfectly aligned with the moment the stolen data was transmitted. "And this," Adelaide said, turning to face Damien, "is the man who tried to destroy it." The room erupted. Damien's face went white. He tried to speak, tried to deny. But Adelaide clicked one more time. Audio played. Damien's voice, recorded during a phone call to a Ledworth executive, discussing payment for proprietary code. The doors at the back of the room opened. 2 FBI agents walked in. Damien Cross. One of them said, "You are under arrest for corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets." Damien's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The agents put him in handcuffs and led him away. The shareholders sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, one person began to clap, then another, then the whole room. Adelaide turned to Henry. He was standing quietly, his face calm, his hands at his sides. She held up the medal. "This belongs to you," she said. "And so does my gratitude." The room applauded louder. Cameras flashed. But Henry shook his head. "Your world is too loud for me and my child," he said softly. "I just want to go home." Adelaide felt tears sting her eyes. "Then let me do something for you," she said. "Let me make sure Ella has the future she deserves." Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. 3 weeks later, Adelaide stood in the lobby of Montgomery Tower. The space had been transformed. Where there had once been cold glass and steel, there was now warmth. Wooden benches, soft lighting, and in the center, a grand piano, polished to a shine. Beside it, in a glass case, were 2 objects, a mop and a bronze medal. The plaque beneath them read, "In honor of those who see what others miss. In memory of Charles Montgomery. In gratitude to Henry Lawson." Ella sat at the piano, her small hands on the keys. She played a simple melody, counting the rhythm with her fingers. Around her, children from across the city listened. They were part of the new music scholarship program Adelaide had created, a program that gave kids like Ella the chance to learn, to grow, to dream. Henry stood in the back, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He had accepted a position as safety advisor, a role that let him work behind the scenes, reviewing systems and training staff, without ever stepping into the spotlight. Adelaide had made sure his schedule was flexible. She had made sure Ella's tuition was covered. She had made sure they were taken care of. Adelaide stood beside him, watching the children. The board had questioned her decision to create the scholarship. They had questioned her decision to honor a janitor, but she had stood firm. And slowly, the company had changed. The culture had softened. People began to look twice, to see beyond titles, to trust people who bent down to fix small mistakes. That evening, as the sun set and the city lights began to glow, Adelaide walked through the building one last time. She paused by the glass case, looking at the mop and the medal. She thought of her father. She thought of the lesson she had almost missed. Sometimes, she thought, we are saved by people we never see coming. And sometimes, if we are lucky, we learn to see them before it is too late. 1 year later, the rooftop garden at Montgomery Tower was filled with children. They ran through rows of flowers, laughing, their voices bright against the evening sky. Ella sat at a small piano, playing a new composition she had written herself. It was called Hero Without a Medal. The melody was simple, but strong, each note clear and true. Henry stood nearby, talking quietly with a group of parents. He still wore simple clothes. He still avoided the spotlight. But his eyes were lighter now. The weight he had carried for so long had eased. Just a little. Adelaide watched from the doorway. In her hand was a magazine. The cover story was titled, "The Janitor Who Became a Guardian." Inside were photos of Henry, of Ella, of the scholarship program. The article talked about second chances and hidden worth, and the power of seeing people as they truly are. She folded the magazine and set it aside. She did not need to read it. She had lived it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Adelaide walked out onto the rooftop. She stood beside Henry and watched the children play. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played. And in the reflection of the glass tower, you could see the city. The people. The light. You could see everything, if you knew how to look.